Every baker should know how to make a delicious vanilla cake. I like this recipe because it is very easy, it's cheap to make, and it's still wonderfully delicious. Hi, I'm Sarah from jacksonsjob.com, and today I'm going to share with you one of my favorite recipes. Here are the ingredients you'll need, but there is also a link below that will give a full written recipe and nutrition information, so don't worry about pausing the screen. Let's get started. I like to begin by getting out the vanilla and weighing it into the measuring cup. I like to use 1 teaspoon or 5 milliliters. You can go up to 2 teaspoons or 10 milliliters, but I wouldn't go beyond that because sometimes people can really be sensitive to the taste of vanilla and it kind of ruins the flavor of the cake. So if you're a vanilla lover, just remember not everyone else is. If you're sharing it with other people, be a little lighter. Next you want 4 eggs, which is about 200 grams. And you'll just want to whisk these briefly. I like to whisk them until they start to show bubbles and it just falls off the spatula when you lift it. It doesn't take very long at all. Sometimes I will tilt the pan back and forth to make it easier to whisk. This is just something I've done since I was little. I'm going to leave this in full-time view so you can see how quick it is to make the cake itself. As you can see, it's now ready to add in some sugar. I put in 3/4 of a cup or 150 grams. You can go as little as 1/2 of a cup, which is 100 grams, or as high as 1 1/4 cups, which is 225 grams. When first starting out, I recommend starting with 3/4 of a cup because it's a nice pleasant balance. You can add a glaze that way and it won't be too sweet, and you don't have to worry about it not being sweet enough for some of those people with a bigger sweet tooth. Now I'm going to pour in the oil, which is 3/4 of a cup or 180 milliliters that contain the vanilla. I like to scrape all of it out as possible so that way the cake stays moist. And then you're just going to whisk it together. You don't have to spend a lot of time whisking, you just basically want to get the oil and eggs cohesive. Your next step is to get 1 1/2 cups or 225 grams of flour and add 1/2 teaspoon of salt or 2 grams and 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder or 6 grams. Now if your baking powder is super fresh, a lot of times you can just do 1 teaspoon or 4 grams. But I'm going to go ahead and stick with the 1 1/2 teaspoons here. Then you just give it a quick stir so that it's well combined. Next you just want to sprinkle it in a little bit at a time. I'm doing this to prevent lumps. If I had a sifter, I would sift it all in at once and I wouldn't have to worry about the lumps. But I'm going to assume a lot of people don't have a sifter and I want to make this recipe easy for everyone. As you can see, it's not a lot of work. If you wanted to, you could put this in a blender, or you could even mix it with a hand mixer, or you could even use your stand mixer if you really wanted to. If you do use a stand mixer, put it on medium for about 2 minutes. This doesn't take long at all to bring together. What I really love about this recipe is how you can customize it to fit any needs. If you don't want a vanilla cake and say you want an orange cake, you can put in either some fresh orange zest and some orange juice and some spices like I did with my orange spice cake. Or you could even replace the vanilla with some other kind of extract, say lemon, and make a lemon cake. It's a really nice versatile recipe and I really enjoy using this as a basis for many of my recipes because one, it's a very cheap cake to make. It's very quick to put together and it doesn't take a lot of ingredients or effort. Within like 10 minutes I can have a cake in the oven. What more could you ask for when you're wanting to experiment with flavors? So I highly recommend make this cake, get the basics of how to make a good solid vanilla cake, and then start experimenting. Start using those spices that you've been meaning to use for all this time. Start using some cocoa powder. Start using some coconut. Start using some fresh fruits. Put in some chocolate chips. You'll be amazed at how versatile this recipe is. Now I'm just going to finish making the little bit of flour that's left. And I'm going to stir it, and as you can see, it's going to get a little bit harder to stir at the end. This is typical. You want this to be a thin batter similar to a box cake mix. I'm going to switch over to a spatula at this point so I can scrape off the remaining flour on the edges. Now a lot of people may be wondering why I like to use oil in my cakes. I like it because it's lower in saturated fat and it also keeps the crumb moist for days. You can actually keep this cake for about a week on the counter. When you use a butter cake, it starts to dry out within a day or so. So unless I'm going to eat a cake right away, I always stick with oil. Plus you get the added health benefits of oil versus butter, and it is a lot cheaper to make. You'll want to use a 9 by 5 or a 23 by 13 centimeter pan. I like to line it with a little bit of parchment paper to make it easier to remove. You can also grease and flour it if you don't have parchment paper. And then you just slowly pour it in. This is a really nice cake recipe because it self-levels and you don't have to do a lot of work. I'm pausing here because the parchment paper was starting to slip. And just using a spatula is awesome here because you can really scrape out every little bit of that cake batter and you're not making any waste. I really recommend getting at least one silicone spatula if you're going to be baking a lot. It's one of those tools that I really appreciate. As you can see, this was a very fast recipe to make. It's beginning to be about 6 minutes now. If I was weighing out my ingredients and not filming it, it would have taken me even less time. I personally recommend, if you're going to start baking heavily, to get a set of digital scales because your baking will just become top notch in no time. I don't even measure anymore. I just give the measurements because a lot of people want to know the US measurements because they're not like me and converted to weighing their ingredients yet. And there you have it. You just give it a little tap if you want to get out the air bubbles, or you don't. Now I'm going to put this again in a oven at 350 or 180 degrees C, and it's going to go anywhere between 45 to 55 minutes on the middle rack. While that's baking, I'm going to show you how to make a simple glaze. You want 1 cup of powdered sugar or 125 grams, and to that you want to add in 1 to 2 tablespoons of liquid or 15 to 30 milliliters. I'm using juice here, but you can use juice, water, milk, extract, pretty much anything you can think of. You can even use like buttermilk, which I think is an amazing flavor combination. But since I'm making this dairy free, I'm going to stick with juice. And I really like the combination of lemon and vanilla, so I'm going to make a lemon glaze here. Now, the thickness is all entirely up to you. If you use about a tablespoon, you're going to get the thickness of a very nice paste. If you use 2 tablespoons, you're going to get a very runny consistency. What I recommend is starting out really slow and only doing about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon at a time so you get to learn how to make this. Now, if you make it too runny and you're really wanting it thicker, a lot of people tell you it's ruined and you have to start over. It's not ruined. All you have to do is add a little bit more powdered sugar. Now, of course, you'll just have more glaze than you need, but some people really enjoy this glaze, so you really can't have too much. As you can see, I'm pouring in just a little bit more because I want it to fall off in a ribbon stage. I have this part of the recipe in full-time view and more detailed explanation in another video. And I also have a website linked to that video. I can post a link in the description box below if you want to go into more detail. But it's honestly not that hard to make. It just takes a little bit of practice, trial and error. As you can see, it's falling off in a really nice ribbon stage and it's ready to go. Now, since this dries pretty quickly, you'll have to cover it or just make it right before the cake comes out. If you make it too early, it'll start to dry, and you can fix that by just stirring it up again. After your cake is cooled about 5 to 10 minutes, you'll want to remove it from the pan. As you can see, the parchment paper made it really nice and easy to remove and didn't leave a lot of mess behind. Then you'll want to remove the parchment paper and set it aside to throw away later. And then we just start glazing. I like to glaze it while it's still a little bit warm because it will cause it to drip off the edges slightly. Normally when you put a cake icing on, you want it to be cool because if not, then the icing will slide right off, especially if it's a butter type icing or butter type frosting. That's where a lot of bakers go wrong. They will get their cake out of the oven and they'll start frosting it right away, and then they'll go, why does my cake look terrible? Let cakes normally cool at least an hour before you start glazing. Can you tell that there was a cloud that just passed over? Sorry about the change in screen color. I know this will bug some people. And as you can see, I'm just using a spatula and I'm just haphazardly putting it on the cake. I'm not really caring what it looks like because it will have a nice rustic appeal to it. This is a very nice, easy recipe for the beginner because it doesn't have to look pretty to be a very lovely looking cake in the end. It doesn't take much time to bake. The icing takes just moments to prepare, and it only takes a few minutes to put the icing on the cake. This is honestly one of my favorite recipes to make when I find somebody is coming. I can put it in the oven. It can be out of the oven by the time they arrive, and I can ice it while they're there, and they just get so excited to see this cake. When you're finished icing, you just want to let it sit and cool until it hardens. And now let's slice into it so you can see what it looks like. As you can see, my guests have arrived and they're very excited about the cake. It doesn't take much. You can saw it back and forth, but I'm just pressing down. Now let's look at this crumb texture. Isn't this amazing? Now if I would have tapped it more, you wouldn't see those air pockets, but I think it makes a nice rustic appeal. This is just a wonderfully delicious, solid vanilla cake. If you enjoyed this, please visit us at jacksonsjob.com. Be sure to subscribe and like for more future videos, and have a great day. Enjoy.